And good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Xanadu Gallery Art Business Academy online critique group session. Today is Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. Here we are already into March. Good to be back here with you on a Wednesday morning. Just quickly, by way of announcement, a couple quick things. First, there will be no broadcast next week. It is my kids' spring break next week. And so we're going to sneak up to Pine Top for a few days. And so I will not be available for broadcast next week. We will be back here the following Wednesday. That will be an Ask Me Anything session. And a reminder that we will have gone through the change to, you all will have changed to daylight saving, which will kick us off by an hour. So just pay attention to the email and the start time for your time zone 2 weeks from today. But with that, I'd like to jump right into our session and welcome our featured artist. I've got Mike here in the video session with us. And Mike, you're coming to us from Spokane, Washington. Is that correct? Let's see if I can get,
Yes.
There we go. Gotcha. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, everyone.
And so to get started, Mike, if you could just give us a little bit of your background and how you came to be creating the photography that you're creating.
Sure. Thank you first for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
I started in television and loved it. The more I was in it, the more I moved more toward longer format, more what they would call magazine style, as opposed to the sort of run and gun stuff. And the more I did that, the
So,
more.
Mike, were you on the journalism side or?
Yes, I was in the journalism side on air. God knows with this face that there was no future there. Uh, so, and as I did that, I went more and more towards storytelling. And as much as I enjoyed that, it all left me unfulfilled, if you will. Whether it was however many minutes it was, and so on. I've worked all over the world in television. And I kept moving more and more towards something that I did as a small kid, which was photography. And I had a dark room, I had medium format film cameras. So I had a long history in photography. And the more I was in television, the more I wanted to go back to photography. And ultimately, I figured out a way to take a short path back to photography in the sense of incorporating it into jobs that had that as part of its brief. And the more I did that, the more I wanted to do nothing else but photography. And ultimately, actually, it was my kids and my wife who said to me, "Why are you putting like one foot in the deep end and one foot in the shallow end? You can't do it that way." And so photography started part-time in a serious way 15, 20 years ago. And then 8 years ago, I went full-time in it.
And so as you jump in and go full time with it, how much initially were you doing on the commercial side and how much was being done on the fine art side?
Yeah, good question. As much as possible on the commercial side, frankly, because it paid the bills, while I tried to do the show circuit and begin to look at galleries and other opportunities, but all of those take a lot of time and a very thick skin. So I tried to work up opportunities that would keep me pursuing what I ultimately wanted, which was the fine art side. I still do that today. I still do commercial work today as well.
Yeah, so kind of if you look at the, how you divide your time today, how much time would you say on average you're spending on the fine art side versus the commercial side? Or excuse me, yeah.
At this point, it's far enough along. I would say it's 70-30, 70 being the fine art side. Some on the commercial side, I have some contracts where my work is licensed. And so I really don't do anything except collect a royalty check, to tell you the truth. And so that has enabled me to do more and more on the fine arts side. and then the clients on that side of the equation review my work every 6 months or so, and then select what they want to license.
And so, on the fine art side, how are people coming to find your imagery? What's the process of getting exposure? What have sales been like, and how has that kind of grown over time?
Sure. The process. I put a lot of effort into an online presence with a website. I do the social media channels, a lot of word of mouth through the various social media channels. I mean, those are the electronic side. I do lots of fine art shows every year, and
And are most of
those
those shows kind of local to you, regional, or you do some traveling?
I do a lot of traveling. They're in so far. I've limited them to the West. I do California. I've done Salt Lake City as an example. I've done Utah. I've done, of course, the Pacific, all those states, but limited to the West. I think my work probably resonates more, or most of it more, in the West than, say, where I'm from originally, which is the East Coast. So it's more that way. And then at the shows, of course, you meet people and interact with people, and there's follow up and that sort of thing later on. I mean, a lot of this is um, I've taken the position that one of the most important things I need to do every day is build and sustain awareness of me and my work. The what I find is the intersection between when someone is aware of my work and when someone may be serious enough to think about buying it or buying something. They're not necessarily in the same week,
Yeah.
and so you've got to stay in front of people in order to remind them that you're not only there, but that you may be uh, part of their life. If
Yeah, boy, you're bringing up some excellent points, and I want to come back to those. I do want to ask one last question, then we'll jump into the work, and that is, how do you feel, kind of your experience, maybe in the television world, but also in the commercial world, and so I guess your kind of past commercial and business experience have helped you to promote your fine art.
oh, they've helped dramatically. I mean, in the end, art, as creative as all of the people whom I know and run with, so to speak, it has to boil down to, you have to be in business tomorrow. And so I'm careful with not only expenses, but I have a business plan. I winter is generally my particular down period in terms of shooting fine art stuff, and I've tasked winter with all sorts of business development things, so that I stay on task and I progress and I set goals every year. And then the following winter, I go back and say, well, how does it match up with what I was hoping for? There has to be, in my opinion, a discipline to it, or else, one, you'll never know if you're going to get there. You'll never know if you are there.
Yeah.
And it's too easy to get so sidetracked and so undisciplined that you end up spending time and resources and, frankly, emotional capital. It's everyone here, I'm sure, the number of times you've been turned down versus the number of times you haven't. Those are all, say what you will, but they're all difficult times. And
Yeah.
so I try to come up with a way that it continues to move me in the right direction.
Words of wisdom. We're going to come back to all of those words of wisdom, but let's jump in and take a look at your work, Mike. And as we're looking at the work, talk to us a little bit about kind of where you're coming from creatively and what you're trying to achieve in the work that you're producing. Oops. If I can get myself going here. There we go.
This is a Cascade Morning, It was shot at dawn in the Cascade Mountain Range, and it was ridiculously cold. Um, and I spent, probably 2 hours in the dark and then in some light, getting ready for this shot and trying to vision what it was I was trying to convey. I don't have a formula, if you will, in the fine art category. I'll shoot pictures and then try to understand why I did that, why I was standing where I was, what motivated me to do it, what I saw, and then what it was I'm hoping to elicit in a response, inviting you into the picture with me. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Gamble Trail is sort of a funny picture. This has been a very frustrating day for me. I just was not, my camera had been silent, so to speak, on this. And at one point, honestly, I was so frustrated with, wasn't finding what I was, in my mind's eye, I was seeing. I actually turned around at this particular point. Oh, thank you. And went, oh my God, there it is. And then started shooting. This one, this particular emotion for me because it's not there anymore. It's in Northern California, and it's high up in the Cleveland National Forest, again at dawn, and it was completely destroyed in a wildfire. And so this image means a lot to me because I know that how I envisioned it, how you all might and would envision it. I mean, it's a beautiful setting. Oh, thank you. It's not there anymore, and it's difficult to understand that for me.
And then we've got just two more.
Yeah, Daylight Ahead was really, I'm looking at light and shadow and color and how it transitions from the highlights into the shadows. Thank you. And I spent a lot of time after I get back just looking at the digital negative and trying to understand again what motivated me, why I framed it the way I did, and what I'm trying to do to attract you to what I call join me in the journey, so that you can have your own relationship, if you will, with the images.
And we've got one other here, Windy.
Yeah. I call this windy because this picture was shot when the wind was blowing at 60 miles per hour, which in itself was a challenge between, I mean, I shoot virtually everything on a tripod, but the tripod was howling, the wind was howling, all the brush was just buried against that fence. Oh, thank you. And it was a very difficult capture because of the conditions and trying to come up with, as you can see, with all the cloudy sky, trying to come up with an aperture that would work for what I was trying to achieve. So technically, this was an extremely challenging image for me.
And talk a little bit, Mike, about how you, well, maybe compare and contrast your approach and techniques between your fine art photography and your commercial photography, and even the work that you were doing in television. You know, what are you doing that is similar across all of those, and what differences are you looking for in your fine art work?
Great question. The similar and a very key point, as far as I'm concerned, is technical ability. I mean, I was formally trained in photography, and whether it's commercial work or fine art work, I start with a technically correct image. I don't come back with like Forest Morning that's the image. There aren't like 75 versions of it, one of which I'm hoping will be correct in exposure, etc. And that's crucial. It's learning the craft. It's being comfortable with the craft, and then I can decide from there what what I was trying to do, what I'm trying to convey. I think the craft sets up sort of a neutrality that allows me in what it is I'm trying to get across, and go on from there. So that's the commonality. The commercial side is you have a brief in hand, if you will, that requires me to sort of stow my latitude. A client is paying X. They need something. They need it typically in a ridiculous hurry, and you have to perform. You have to perform on deadline. One of the things I like about it is just that. It keeps me sharp in terms of the technical capabilities. I did a shoot for a huge East Coast company out here not that long ago, and I was shocked by this. They were going to press with their annual report, and they thought they had forgotten something. So they contracted with me to take some pictures. The corporate headquarters out here allowed me to set up at 10 a.m. The shoot was going to be over by 11 a.m. I had to upload the finished images back east by noon. And so, and it rained, it decided it was going to rain that morning, and it was outside. So just your mindset, and whatever art you're in, there are corollaries. I mean, this is my story in that situation, but there would be corollaries in all your practices of how am I going to make this work? That helps me build I think my presence within the field, because of that requirements to be incredibly disciplined and incredibly responsive to a client. I just can't show up and act like it's just another day. I'm on the clock. What I find when I'm working like with an individual, for instance, in a headshot or something, is they're only good for a certain amount of time, and then it doesn't matter. They lose their focus, they lose their interest, they're exhausted from the experience, and so I have to bring skills to bear that make them be their best and show off their best, and it forces me to think about it in a different way.
And let's take a look at the presentation of the work. And again, this is something we've discussed in past sessions, and it's a challenge for painters and watercolorists and pastelists. But I think in particular for photographers, kind of figuring out the physical manifestation of your artwork and how you're going to present it, both in terms of scale and in terms of your approach to framing and setting the work off. And so, Mike, what has, as you're thinking about putting your artwork in front of potential collectors, what has been your kind of mentality and your vision for how the work is going to be shown?
Yes, another great question. Everything I do is framed by professional framers. And that came right out of the fine art shows. I would have people come into the booth and they would say to me, I this today. I then have to then go out and get it framed. This happened to me in Beverly Hills. I was doing the Beverly Hills show, and a couple came in and they really liked a certain piece, and it was not framed. And the discussion they were having, that I was just sort of listening, eavesdropping on, so to speak, was, well, if we buy it, we have to go get it framed, and we have to this, and we have to that, and we have to that. And then people started asking me, well, what would it cost if I bought this and you framed it? So I took the next step, and it happened so many times. And what I realized was what people were saying is, if I buy your work, I want the ability to go hang it
Yeah.
immediately. And I've had people at several shows. In fact, and in another time I did Beverly Hills, I had someone say to me, to take it home and then reframe it later. And then the following year, I was there and they saw me again and they said, "Oh, by the way, the frame was so nice, we never changed
Yeah.
it."
Yeah, people don't want to buy a problem or a set of
Right.
choices that they have to make. They want to buy a piece of artwork that they can hang.
They want to show off, whatever motivated them in again, whatever field you're in this session. They want to display why they were moved by you. And if they have to do, and everybody's crazy busy in life. And what I found, I just came up with solutions that were highly professional looking, that could fit in any style, if you will.
Yeah, because your
And
framing is fairly, black and white matte and frame, and straightforward, more contemporary molding. What pulled you that direction as opposed to doing something more ornate or gilt?
I developed a relationship with a framing company that serves, in fact, you may know them, Jason, they only serve galleries and artists. They're not open to the general public. And I took some of my work in and basically laid it out and said, "You're the experts, not me. I need a professional solution, and I need which company? It's called Janus Molding. They're in Seattle and here in Spokane as well." And they looked at it. They, of course, have years and years of experience, and so I rely on people way smarter than me. And then you say, now you have to temper it with it can't it has to look good, it has to be professional, it has to be the kind of thing that someone in a significantly expensive home would be happy to hang without any question. And they came up with some of the solutions. This was one, and together we decided that a contemporary look would cross enough boundaries that it would look good.
And the last question, then I want to get some of our panelists in to comment on your work. But what, as you're out at shows and people are encountering the work, what do they seem to be responding to in the work? And, what are you hearing them say about your work as they're standing in front of it and experiencing it?
The first thing, when I'm at a show, I'm probably the worst salesman there. I don't, when people come in, if they say hello to me, I'll say hello back. I let people browse and I'm quiet about it. And what I find is that it shows it's almost always, if there's a partnership, a couple, they both have to be there and you hear them talking. And often what will happen is one will say, "Oh, that either reminds me of something," or I they're doing what I'm hoping for, which is to get drawn into the image and begin to forget about sort of the frame drops away, and they're thinking in their own mind what it means to them and how they're motivated by it. And I still don't say a word. And at some point, if they're, and sometimes they'll stop and then they'll leave. And other times they'll turn to me and ask me a question. And so in the shows, I let people do what ultimately, if they're going to own it, will do, which is to interact with it and create their own emotion and experience within it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think and I wonder if the panel here would agree with me that I wonder if it isn't a little bit of a mistake to not be talking a little bit more about your work, because you talk about it very very cogently and with great insights, and I suppose that there's a little bit of a challenge because you took a photograph in a place. but the viewer is being reminded of something in their own experience. So I suppose you have to be a little bit careful about not, imposing too much reality on the emotional experience that they're having.
I think it's that I tend to be inward, I guess, to begin with. And I do think that the step between liking it or not liking it for that matter, and moving forward is one that it's a decision they have to make. And frankly, what I'm always afraid of is if I start talking, as you just said, Jason, you interrupt their train of thought, and suddenly wherever they were, they're not there anymore. And that it may be good, it may be bad. What I find is at the shows, they know that I'm the person who the artist, and that if they want to talk about it, I'm happy to. I'm happy to go into whatever detail that they want, but I'm concerned about, especially in the shows, that they get sort of not accosted, but they're approached at every single time.
Sure.
And I think my thing may be let them sort of breathe.
Yeah.
And if they like it enough to say, well, what about that? For instance, last year, there was one live show last year that I did, and a piece called Out to Sea was up, and a fellow comes into the booth, and he's looking at it, and he's looking at it, he's looking at it. And then he turns to me, and he says, "It's calling me." And I'm sitting there thinking, my first reaction was to say, well, is it a collect call? Yeah. And it's like, well, what does that mean exactly? And so I walked over to him, and we started talking about it and that sort of thing. And then his wife came in, who had been, I don't know, somewhere nearby, of course. And so he's whatever, 3 blocks down, so to speak, in connecting with that particular piece. She's is brand new, and suddenly he turns to her. They're in different places, and they need to be in the same place pretty much in order for a sale to occur. And so then I actually retreated because they started talking, and she liked it, but she didn't have the same resonance, frankly, as he did with it, which was really pretty interesting because it was a big piece. And ultimately they left, and then he came back 10 minutes later and said, we're doing it. We're buying it, and that sort of thing. And, I don't, every show is different, of course, and this, that, and the other thing. And I try to figure out, how to be respectful of people's privacy, frankly, at a show. And at the same token, how to be available when there's something to be said.
When they need it. Yeah. Yeah, no, great conversation. And let me, let's go ahead and bring the panel in. I would love to get your reactions first to Mike's work, and then let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of the breadth and the consistency of the work. So let me go ahead and open it up to the panel. And if you want to jump in, you can throw your hand up. There's a button to put your hand up, or you can just throw a hand up in front of your camera. I'd love to hear just your, first of all, just kind of your emotional reaction to work and what you're experiencing as you see these images. And, I guess I can't see everybody here. So if you just want to unmute yourself and hop in, you can do that too. And if I don't get volunteers, I will volunteer you. Who do I have? Let me go to Melanie. And Melanie should be asking you to unmute there. And then I'll go to Susanna. Morning, Melanie.
Good morning. Oh, Mike, your work is just absolutely spectacular. For me, it gives me goosebumps. You create such a mood that, like in the Peace Gamble Trail here, I just want to walk through there and feel that peacefulness. And in every one of your pieces, it has that that emotion. And I think that's just wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melanie. And Santana. Oh, it looks like I've still got you muted there, Santana. Let's see if we can get you.
Wait.
There we go. Now I've got you. Oh, nope. Now I don't have you again.
Come here.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, I put some comments in the chat because I think your work is beautiful. I've stood looking at the ridges of mountains going off and off into the distance, and there's a softness in your work, and it just is almost like painting. But I also love the wisdom of your philosophy and your, sensitivity to people and to nature and to the work. So I really love this work. I love the softness and stillness that seems to be at the core of it.
Thank you.
And I noticed you have a lot of pathways, which I always find intriguing because you want to go down the path.
Mm-hmm.
And the path it starts physically, but it goes other places. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I love the
Mike,
outdoors.
and I think there are a couple of good points raised here. Your work, your fine art is not journalism. You are opinionated and, clearly deliberate about the composition, the lighting, the soft edges. So I think all of us are kind of seeing some of the same sensibilities that we might expect to see in a painting. How has that developed over time?
It's developed with just my own process and learning. And, as artists, I think what we all learn, and maybe what is the hardest in many ways, is you have to put yourself into it. You cannot just present whatever art form it is. You cannot just put something out there that isn't you, that doesn't have some piece of you in it. And the more I worked with pieces, the more I realized that you have to take a pretty deep breath and look at an image and think about it, and again go back to what was it that brought you to that point. And that particular shot, there's an image that I have, it's not in here, called Old Friend, because I worked on it for 6 months. I could not, it took me 6 months to acquaint myself with the image in a way that finally we agreed on what it was really trying to be, and what I had seen. And so the more I do this, the more I work on that element of it.
And well, let's talk about consistency. It's a little bit of a challenge. Just with the few images that we have to really draw on consistency. I think a lot of us went to your website and looked at some of the work there. But I wonder what those of you in the panel think about consistency. And I think I've got Jeff Green here. And Jeff, you had written to me a little bit about the consistency. Could I get your comments and reaction to the work? And you're a fellow photographer, so would have some insights there as well.
Good morning.
Morning, Jeff.
So, my initial thoughts about it were that I thought the first 3 images went really well together. There's a kind of etherealness to them, and they're more evocative to me. They kind of are of a piece. We hit the 4th image, and I felt it, for me, it didn't work as well. This one, kind of compared to the others, was a little bit of an outlier. And then the black and white piece, from like a pure consistency point of view, I don't think fit. Although looking at your website, Mike, I found myself drawn actually most to some of the long exposure black and white work.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, kind of overall, from a subject matter point of view, part of me was kind of wondering sort of where your heart is. And does it make sense to land in one place? as you move forward. And Jason, you can talk about that more in terms of obviously like galleries, where at art fairs, some varieties might make sense, but I just wondered kind of, I still wasn't sure where your heart was in all this. And is it more of the kind of evocative color work, or is there a choice to be made, and how do you make it? Kind of.
Yeah, Mike, let's get your response to that first.
Sure, Jeff. The the color work and the black and white work both have their unique set, both technical and otherwise. I find myself in looking more and more at a scene in the sense of like on the black and white work or the almost monochromatic color work as more evocative and more, I guess, thoughtful in what I'm hoping the viewer will do. I don't think I do the I don't have a series of techniques in processing, if you will, that always come to the same end result. I have a whole series of steps and techniques that I'll look at and use, especially in color, because with color, of course, you also have that whole, if you manipulate color, if you're not very careful about how you manipulate color, you will send somebody out the door, so to speak, because you have gone too far. Like on Daylight Ahead, for instance, what caught me and what I'm trying to convey is the whole light and dark, and how the color in the image changes and moves through the frame that way. So that's what I kept working on in developing that image, as opposed to Enchanted Forest, which we'd seen earlier framed. So I don't do a one size fits all, I guess, is maybe what I'm really trying to say. I think the body of work in general relates to my love of the outdoors, my respect for the outdoors, to make sure that I do no harm in my travels and in my work. Outside of that, it's to try to, if I come back with, and Jeff, you especially as a photographer may share the same sentiment. If I'm out for 10 days and I come back and in the end there's one image that I think is worth something, it's been a good trip.
Yeah, I do. I mean, as somebody who's trying to juggle sort of I think there's a tug back and forth between what you spontaneously react to in the field and then intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether maybe because of your past commercial life, you're pushing way towards the more spontaneous discovery approach. But I just wonder if there isn't potentially a more unified portfolio in there, and whether that matters, to, I mean, in terms of consistency, like Jason, maybe you want to weigh in here too about that.
Yeah,
like,
in
what I would say subject
is,
matter and style and theme.
Yes, it's and we've talked about this repeatedly in these sessions, that it's a little bit hard to put your finger on. We've been talking a lot about kind of formulas here, but it's hard to say to create a standard of consistency and apply it across every single artist and say this artist is consistent and this one isn't, because each artist's work has its own parameters that the work has to be judged by. And what I'd say is as I've looked at Mike's work, both just the few images that were submitted and then spent some time on the website, there are very clearly different bodies of work within the larger universe that he's working in. And I agree. I think that it would be difficult in a gallery setting to take the 5 images that we've seen today and hang those 5 together, just by themselves. Certainly the black and white image would jump out and feel like, wait a minute, you know, this is a little bit of a shock when I'm seeing it after having just seen these other four colored pieces. But you know, then as you look across the body of work and you start thinking about a portfolio, it's pretty easy to see that you could create a strong portfolio that groups those various bodies together, and just gives different opportunities for experience for the viewer, for the gallery, you know, and for potential buyers. And I'm curious, Mike, do you tend to see more sales in the color photography or the black and white?
I think there even I should mention is the website, a website, and I think we're kind of talking around this, but let me try to focus in on it a minute. I think a website is sort of a broad body of work, because it's appealing to different people from different points of view, in my case at least. When I do a presentation, for instance, 10 days ago, every year in the middle of February, I do a presentation to the Museum of Arts and Culture, which is a huge museum in the inland Northwest. And they, Cascade Morning and Forest Morning, those two pieces are among the pieces of mine they have in one of their collections. And so when I did this year's presentation, I went through all of my work and came up with, I believe what Jason, what you're talking about and what Jeff's talking about is kind of, this is me, if you will, in the context of the museum setting. And their selections, I was fortunate this year, they selected 4 new works of mine for the collection. And I think they would all fit in the theme we were just talking about of Cascade Morning and Forest Morning. So I think there's some of that going on. I think it's still a great point because you don't want to confuse people.
Yeah, that's the balancing act.
Exactly. And I'm sure some days it's better than others in terms of getting it right or whatever. When I do a show, I tend to do almost 50-50, or very close to that in terms of that. And some will engage with a black and white piece, and others will engage more with the color side of things. So there's a sort of a more generic, more global approach. Yeah. And then I think there's a much more specific, what would you, for instance, I have a customer on the west side of the state who's bought a lot of my pieces, and he and his wife, and big and very big copies of it. And so when they look at the site, their mindset is big, very big, and their particular love are the national parks. So they will go right by. They might say, oh, I like that piece, or I like this piece, or whatever. And so some of this is you're creating a portfolio for a specific either person or couple or situation,
or their
as
type.
opposed to,
yeah.
Exactly. When they just sold them a new piece about a month ago, and they called and said, we want a new piece, we want it big. We're thinking this, show us what you have, and then funnel it down from there.
Yeah. Well, we've done it, Mike. We've gone over our time. Some great conversation. I do want, though, just very quickly to have you comment on 2 things. One is how you've kind of come about and set your pricing and the value of the work, and kind of your formulas to that. And then second, are you printing and promoting and selling the pieces as limited or open editions?
Sure. The stuff I sell is all limited edition and very small editions. I think there's not only perceived value, but I hope real value in that sense. Especially in the art world, if it's one of 10,000, it doesn't have the same sensibility, if you will, in that regard. And pricing, I talk to lots of people, and I look at lots of stuff online. For instance, recently with the museum, we talked pricing, and they want me to significantly raise prices. So I'll end up doing that. I mean, I'm about to do as we sort of look ahead to show season, I'll start setting pricing for this year. And I just got a new opportunity actually yesterday. So that requires some pricing. So I started out trying to set pricing in a way that would, what I would call, keep me in the game, that I could pay for shows and pay for the cost of production and so on, and have pudding once a week, but to try to develop so a following, I guess, basically, and then now those are going up, and I've only had one instance where someone has argued price with me, where they wanted to pay less. And in the end, I just thought it sounded ridiculous. So I was very polite, but it was just like, basically, get out of my life.
Well, excellent. And I think we could continue the conversation, but Mike, I really want to thank you for being here with us in the session this morning and sharing your insights on your work and your approach to your work, your background. I've seen a lot of positive comments in the chat. Thanks all of you for joining us in this chat session. And Mike, if members here want to follow you and keep up with what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way would be Instagram, which is Mike DeCesare. And if people have questions, follow-up questions, shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer that and answer any follow-up questions. I saw some going by that I understand for limits of time, but I'm happy to discuss or share what I know. So many people have done that with me and have helped me so much. If there's any kind of insight or tidbit of information I can provide you, I'm happy to do that. And I feel a responsibility.
I appreciate that. And they can find your contact information on your website.
On the website.
Which the link to the website is at the bottom of Mike's photo on our broadcast page. Again, thank you so much, Mike. And
thank you very much
for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing you all back here in 2 weeks' time. Reminder, no broadcast next week. We'll be back here in 2 weeks' time. So keep an eye out for the email for that session. Take care, everyone.